Hello friends, it's Grace and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing my June wrap-up and talking about all the things that I read last month. And this is an interesting one because usually I can manage to wrap things up within the month and I will not start books if I don't think I'm going to finish them and things like that. But I have a few carryovers from starting them in June and finishing in July. And I also have a DNF, which is kind of rare for me. I'm not opposed to DNFing books, but I've been lucky this year in the sense that I haven't had to DNF anything until now. So for my stats, I finished 6 books in the month of June, and then I had 1 DNF, and then I had 2 books that are carrying over. They were not finished in June. So basically, my ratings for these books are 2 5-star reads, 2 4.5-star reads, and 2 4-star reads. So very positive on the whole. But then, of course, you have the DNF. So I don't rate DNFs, but I wasn't enjoying it, which is why I didn't continue. So that is the one negative stain on all of this. But I overall had a really, really great month and read some favorites. So let's get into it. And I am going to go starting from the bottom, aka the 4 stars, and then I'll work my way up to the best. Although I will start by talking about the things that I didn't finish. So let's just quickly talk about the carryovers. The first one of these is Mrs. Death, Mrs. Death, and this was the June book club pick for mine and Ben from Overly Average Ben's joint Discord server. So this was one that I just didn't have a chance to start until later in the month, and I was always planning to read it in June because of the fact that it was the book club pick, and I was interested in this and I wanted to participate, but I just didn't have the time to finish it in June. So this will be featured in my July videos and wrap up and stuff like that, but this I did start. And then the second book that I didn't finish in June, and I'm actually still not finished with it, is Towers of Midnight by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. And this one, it's not at all that I'm not enjoying it, because I am enjoying it, but I just purely had a really busy work schedule near the end of the month, and I don't get a lot of reading done on those days. So this one just ended up I just didn't have a whole lot of time to read, and this is I'm still working on it. I'm getting through a decent chunk of it on a daily basis now, and yeah, like I said, I am really enjoying it. So I just can't always binge the Wheel of Time books super fast. It does take me some energy to process what I'm reading. I want to take in the details, so I'm just trying to take it at a pace where I'm enjoying it to its fullest. So those were the 2 books in June that I didn't finish, but not because they were DNFs. But on the other hand, we have my actual DNF, which was an audiobook, and that was Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. And so I picked this audiobook up on a whim. I just saw that it was available on the library app, and I thought that it would be interesting, and in a way it was interesting, but it just wasn't for me. It was the philosophy and the tone that weren't hitting for me. There were some things that I thought were probably good tips, and I do agree with the entire concept that we as a society need to be aware of what social media does to our brains and our habits and how much we consume. And I'm in support of being deliberate of how you have an online presence and things like that. But there was something about the way this book was written. I think that it was not very generous to the general person who uses social media. This author openly said that he has never used social media, which is fine, but it also leads me to experience that there was a little bit of a tone of superiority in the book, and I feel that as someone who has never been ensconced in the world of social media, the author can definitely have that as something to be proud of if he'd like, but I also feel like on another level he doesn't fully understand what someone trying to adjust their life online might feel like or might experience, since he has never experienced it. So I think that there was a disconnect there for me. The other thing was that the author used a lot of words to say very little. The book was at 40%. In my opinion, I didn't know what direction it was going into. Like, he said that he had a 3-step process, and we had already been through the 3 steps, and I was very surprised because I assumed that his process was going to constitute the whole book, but it clearly didn't. And then we had gone into like his own philosophy, and he was using examples that seemed very privileged and didn't acknowledge the challenges that people without enough access to certain resources may not be able to implement some of these things, and the book didn't seem very sensitive to that. And on the whole, I just thought that I got to a point where I realized I was forcing myself to listen to it. Even though it is only a 7-hour audiobook, I still only managed to get 40% of the way through because I, on a daily basis, just had no desire. So I'm surprised I made it as long as I did, honestly. I kept thinking it was going to get better, and I just couldn't do it. The interesting thing for me about this one is that looking at the reviews, it seems to be very split. I saw a ton of 5-star reviews for it, and I'm really glad that there were people that found something really valuable in this book, but there were also a ton of 1-star reviews that mentioned some of the same problems that I had. So clearly these people made it through the whole book and weren't impressed with what they found at the end of the book. And so even though I decided to just stop reading it, I definitely fall on the more negative side, and it just wasn't for me. So now that we have covered my DNF, let's get into the 2 4-star reads for the month. And so first, I'm going to talk about my other audiobook for the month of June, and that was American Dirt by Janine Cummins. And this was an interesting experience because this book, I think, ultimately was beautifully written and had a lot of emotion and a lot of really, really authentic portrayals of like personal experience, but it also wasn't what I thought it was going to be and what I hoped for. It had some of what I hoped for, but it ultimately didn't end up doing what I hoped that it would do with the story. So I ended up at a 4 because I did really enjoy my experience listening to it. I think that Janine Cummins is a really beautiful writer and a really talented author, but part of me, and this was mentioned in other reviews too, worries that she was almost like making a stereotypical telling of an immigrant story. And I don't know that she meant harm by it, but there is definitely a genre of books that are trauma porn, and I have heard that term thrown around before, and this book did toe the line for me between having things for the sake of the story and having a little bit of extra trauma thrown in just because. And another book that I talked about that in was The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna, and I'm starting to notice more and more in a certain genre of book about human struggle where we see characters suffering just because. And even Robin Hobb does this, arguably, in the Farseer trilogy. And it's something where even if I'm loving so many other aspects of a book, I can't quite get over that hurdle. I hate when that happens. I need there to be like a real reason for this. And I know that on the other hand, you can say, well, in real life, there is not necessarily a good reason for senseless violence or trauma, and that's true, but I don't think that we need to read it gratuitously in books to get the value of the story that's trying to be told. So I can fall on both sides of it. It really, for me, depends on a feeling that I get while reading a book. and about whether I feel like it's over the top or not. So I really did feel like this book hugged the borderline there, but it was really well done emotionally. Like, I thought that there were a lot of really intentional and delicate topics covered, and the love between a mother and son was a really powerful theme in this book, and there were a lot of really complex characters and complex emotions, and I thought that all of that was great. So I kind of landed on 4 stars as a result of really enjoying my time reading it, and yet there were things that I did not enjoy about it. So it was a positive enough experience, obviously, to get a good rating. But as you can see by all that I've said, there are things that I still think about that tug at me a little bit. The other thing I will say is that the audiobook narrator did a phenomenal job too, so I would definitely recommend the audiobook, and just in general, I would recommend American Dirt to those who are kind of interested in that literary human condition type of story. I think that it is a really, really good one for that. But I would recommend, and I'm going to try and do this too, is looking for more own voices stories in this same vein if I'm going to read more in the future. So the other 4-star read for me in the month of June, which, to be fair, was a short story, but I counted it by itself because it took me enough effort to read it that it deserved its own slot, was The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, which I read from my copy of The Complete Tales and Poems, which I have not read all of this. I've read about half of it, which took a lot of effort in itself. But it has been quite some time since I read The Fall of the House of Usher, and with the release of What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher coming probably pretty close to when you're going to be seeing this video, July 12th, 2022. It is a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher, and so I wanted to read the original once again. It is like a 20-page short story. I think it really depends on the edition that you're reading. I've seen it be up to like 60 pages on some Goodread editions, but regardless, it is short. It is full of Edgar Allan Poe's beautiful but dense writing, and definitely a second read was beneficial for me because the atmospheric and creepy sense of the story and the mystery lead you to, or at least in my experience, not necessarily fully grasp it the first time. And that is partially because I'm not used to reading prose like his, where the sentences are long, and it is very much that classic style of writing, but I really enjoyed the story. I just needed a little bit more time to parse it and to actually make sure that it was sinking in. So it's a really, really, I don't want to say anything about it because it's a short story, like I'm gonna spoil something. But it's just a really, really efficient use of a mystery and the atmosphere and like the creep factor, so I thought that it was great. Now, my first 4.5-star read, and I put these back to back for a reason, was What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher, the retelling of the Poe story. And so this is the arc that I read that I just mentioned is coming out in about a week, and I thought that it was really amazing. And I did just post a dedicated review for this, so I won't go into it too much because it really is hard to say anything about this. It's pretty short still. It's a novella rather than being a short story, but it is still something that I think is best to go into just knowing the general idea. So you have our main character, Alex Easton, and they are a sworn soldier, and they are called to the childhood home of their friend Madeline Usher and her brother Roderick Usher. And so you have the House of Usher, of course, and there are strange things going on. The entire landscape seems like it is deteriorating. There is sickness, vividly visible and evident in the land and the people. But it's a mystery where this comes from, what is happening, and what's happening to the land and the people. And so Alex Easton is called here, and they try to help their friends and they try and solve the mystery, and it goes from there, and it is much like the original story. Very atmospheric, very, very creepy, very well done, but this one has more of a concrete resolution and a very satisfying unraveling of a mystery and good characters, and I just really, really enjoyed it. So yeah, I gave it 4.5 stars, and that's all I will say, and I will link my review if you're interested in it, and you can go check that out. Then my second 4.5 star read of the month was Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, and this one was just adorable, like a palate cleanser type read, but very satisfying in its own right. Like, when I call things palate cleansers, I don't want it to diminish them, but the reason that I call things that is because they fit so well in between longer and heavier books. So yes, this was a lighter read, but it was still like chock full of a really, really satisfying story with great characters and just some like uplifting and nice experiences. So you have your main character Viv, who has been a barbarian, kind of like a tough, who leaves her gang and tries to start a new life in this city that she has chosen, and she wants to open a coffee shop, and coffee comes from elsewhere in the world. The people that she is trying to bring it to have never heard of it before, and she makes friends, and she does her best to build a new life. And of course there is a little bit of romance in here, but there's also a little bit of intrigue. Like, there's a bit of a grimy underworld to this city, and Viv is trying to prevent herself from being caught up in it, and it's like, I don't know, it was just so much fun. I basically devoured this in, I don't know, 2 days. I couldn't put it down. It made me so happy, and it had a great message, and I don't know, it was just awesome. So I would 100% recommend this. I know it is being re-released, so I'm not entirely sure how easy it is to get a copy of this right now, but I imagine that it is still available on Kindle, so if you have a chance to pick it up, you definitely should. Okay, so my 2 5-star reads for the month. I don't even know what order to talk about them in, because they're both definitely favorites. But I think that I am going to talk about the one that is the first book in a series first, and then I will talk about the concluding book of a series second. So the first one of those would be The Mask of Mirrors by M.A. Carrick, and this was my patron pick for the month of June. Thank you to Kate from the Literary Apothecary for choosing this one, because I knew that I was gonna like it, but I didn't know how much I was gonna love it. And I am so, so happy to have had the experience of reading this. So in Mask of Mirrors, we follow Ren, our main character, who is a con artist, and she is trying to con her way into a noble family, pretending to be an estranged daughter of one of their relatives from another place. And basically she wants to secure financial stability for herself and her sister, who is posing as her maid and seamstress. And there is so much more to it than that, but that is the basis of this story. But you have some really interesting religion in here, you have some really interesting magic, there is so much political maneuvering, and all of this comes together to form a larger mystery. And the other important thing about this book is that the series is called The Rook and Rose. And so you have this outlaw, mysterious figure character in this story called the Rook. And he is almost like I don't know, he's not exactly a superhero, but he's sort of like a vigilante where he will go after nobles, but he is like a hero to the poor, like a Robin Hood sort of character. And he is involved in the mystery of this book, the political maneuvering. He always shows up at interesting times, and Ren is trying to figure out who this figure could be, and he is a very interesting part of this book and definitely a positive. I loved the characters in here. I said that this gives me Lies of Locke Lamora vibes, and I think that on the whole they are fundamentally different, but they have a lot of similarities in the way that the setting feels and the way that the maneuvering feels, and how characters always have something extra up their sleeves, and you're really looking forward to seeing how it's going to unfold and how somebody is going to be clever. Like, I love that. This is something that I've learned is one of my favorite things in a story ever is watching how someone is going to be clever and how they are going to outsmart their enemies and what they have up their sleeves. And it's always really satisfying when you realize what that is. So this has a ton of that. It's just got, I don't know, it's got so much intrigue. It was so compelling. I never wanted to put it down. So this was 5 stars, and I think it's a new favorite for me. I said that it was my favorite book of the year so far in my mid-year freakout tag, and it does deserve that slot, but it also was in that slot by merit of like not being a sequel, because the next book that I'm about to talk about is the finale to one of my favorite series of all time. So they don't take anything away from each other. They're both amazing books, and I would 100% recommend reading Mask of Mirrors. But I can't lie and say that it's not on equal ground as Robin Hobb and her Live Ship Traders trilogy, because Ship of Destiny was stunning. I don't even know. This is one of those times akin to Jade Legacy where after the conclusion of a trilogy, I'm just left at a loss. Like, so emotional, such amazing character arcs and journeys, and I would do a review of this series, but trying to encompass it and trying to talk about it just feels so daunting. Like, I'm not saying that I won't, because I would have to gather my thoughts. I don't know how to talk about this series. Like, anybody who has read Ship of Magic and Mad Ship going into Ship of Destiny, I like envy you the experience of having that again. And I don't want to talk about anything specific because, of course, this is the finale of a trilogy. So talking about plot is very difficult. But the thing about this series and Robin Hobb's books is that characters are driving the story. So you don't have like a plot that's going to happen regardless. You truly have characters making decisions and changing the course of destiny. And destiny is a theme in here, and it's the convergence of a bunch of moments that come together and decisions to change the course of where the world goes. And the magic system in this series is phenomenal, and there is some political maneuvering, but it's more subtle in here. It's less, I guess, glamorized, but it is still very, Robin Hobb is very gritty. Like, characters make authentic decisions, they make bad decisions, they have realistic consequences for their actions. I don't know, I can't say enough about how good it is, and I'm talking in a way that doesn't even make sense because my thoughts are not organized. Even though I've had a bunch of time since I finished this, I still don't even know like how I feel, except that it's amazing and I loved it. So Live Ship Traders cemented itself as one of my favorite series of all time, easily, and I don't think it's going anywhere from that list anytime soon, even though people say that the Realm of the Elderlings continues to get even better. But I am taking like an unplanned break from that world just because I would like to get to some other things, and I think that probably later this year I'll try and pick up the next series in the Realm of the Elderlings, and I have no problems with that because I think Live Ship Traders deserves to stand on its own for a little while before I try and pile more on top of it. It's just so good. So once again, after telling you incoherently how I feel about a Robin Hobb book, that is it for this one. That's all the stuff that I read in the month of June, and it was a really, really great reading month, even though I didn't finish as many books as I had planned. The ones that I did finish were well worth it, and it was definitely a quality over quantity type of month. So I have no regrets about what I managed to finish, and I am really, really happy. So please, down in the comments, let me know maybe what your favorite book from the month of June was, what you think about what I read, and like this video if you liked it. Subscribe if you would like to see more content from me. I post new videos every Monday and Thursday, and I have my socials, Discord, and Patreon link in the description if you're interested in any of that stuff. So with that said, I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day. Bye!